both the NATO investment pledges, the 2% of GDP on defense spending, and at least 20% of the defense budget on equipment and research and development. We're the only NATO country not making it. Why does this DPU not address that lack of commitment?
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, under this DPU, that beginning next year and every year thereafter, we'll be meeting the 20% commitment for investment in capital expenditure. I would also point out, as I mentioned earlier, in Canada, we do not publish our aspirations. We publish our funded plans. And this document talks about the money that we'll be committing in this upcoming budget in order to bring that forward. I've spoken to our allies. All of them want to continue to encourage us to meet the 2% requirement, but all of them
I have to stop you, Minister. Your entire policy update is aspirational. It's full of exploring options. It's full of reaffirming existing commitments. There are actually very few policy changes in this policy update, unless you hadn't been considering the management of all of these priorities all along. This entire thing is an exercise in aspiration. There are no tangible outcomes that it can be measured by dates and specific dollar amounts, other than far down the road, far after another election. So, Minister, this defense update cannot possibly be characterized as anything other than an aspirational document.
Well, $8.1 billion isn't aspirational. It's a budget. And it's got a clear plan for when expenditures can be made. Now, I cannot, and frankly, I have some very serious doubts whether any other government would ever make the same type of investment in defense, because your record speaks for itself. But what I can tell you is that this is a funded plan that has real dollars and real investments. It has been well received by industry that told us they needed that clarity and certainty, and we've provided it. It's been well received by our allies who see a very strong upward trajectory of defense spending, and near tripling of defense budgets by our Canadian government since the last time another government was responsible for defense spending. And so there is a real clear plan. And if you didn't see it here, I'd invite you to go back and read it again.
We're running out of time, Minister. One more question, just as a reminder for people about the detachment between announcement and reality. On January 10th, your government announced that January 10th, 2023, they announced they would purchase a NASAM system for Ukraine worth $406 million. 1 year ago, last week, your predecessor falsely claimed that system was en route. This was an announcement. These are claims that you make about expenditure, but they haven't happened. Could you tell me on what date will that system be delivered?
Yeah, I can share with you what Ambassador Cohen and the U.S. Department of Defense has shared with us. In order to deliver that system to Ukraine, Canada we already provided all the missiles and systems that we had available to us, but we had to acquire.
Why did the predecessor mislead Canadians then and say it was en route?
Mr. Kelly, did you want an answer to your question?
Well, you're not answering it.
Either way, you're going to get 10 seconds to finish your answer, and then we'll be on to Mr. Fillmore.
Yeah, we finalized the United States finalized their contract with Raytheon to acquire those systems. We're part of that contract, and I have been assured by the U.S. government that Canada's system will be delivered among the very first of those that are ready as they come off the line. They won't be delivered until they're actually made, but as soon as they're made, we'll get them delivered.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Fillmore, final 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, Deputy, General, Chief, thank you all for your time here today. Thank you for your service to all Canadians, including and especially those in uniform, many of whom serve in Halifax. As you know, significant elements of all three branches call Halifax home. And in fact, the Air Force, the Royal Canadian Air Force, is celebrating its centennial birthday this year, and I was very fortunate to be present at 12 Wing Shearwater last week to help mark that milestone with serving members in the Air Force. A little later this week, HMCS Montreal will embark to the Indo-Pacific on Op Horizon. So lots going on in Halifax that is touched by this defense policy update. Minister, given the events over the weekend in the Middle East and the overall security environment in the world, I was particularly struck by the commitment to provide the Royal Canadian Air Force and the Royal Canadian Navy with the striking power, the need to deter threats at an appropriate distance, to provide those two branches with the striking power to deter threats at an appropriate distance, and the exploration of options to acquire long-range air and sea-launched missiles. I wonder if you could expand on why those investments in that particular hardware is necessary in the current security environment.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Fillmore. The threat environment has been evolving fairly significantly, and one of the things that we have seen is the application and the use of technologies with respect to long-range fires, missile defense that enable for our people to operate safely and to be able to project force in defense of this country, and the Air Force has been very clear. We have made a very significant investment now, and we're going to be delivering 88 F-35 fighters as an example. We've got to make sure that we get the very best and modern missiles to arm them with, so that they can be as effective as we will require them to be. And if I may, just very briefly, the language here is pretty clear. We've used the word explore, and I know some people have objected to that. But to be quite honest with you, there's work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we do the analysis required. And the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence and our industry partners are all working full of pace in order to define those requirements, to make sure that we deliver for the members of the Canadian Armed Forces, and therefore for all Canadians, the very best of equipment that they are going to require to do the important missions that we ask of them. And so we are doing the work that is necessary, but we try to acknowledge in this document the acquisition of that capability is absolutely essential to Canada's security and defense. And so we are doing the hard work of exploring it. We'll make sure that when we've done that work, we get the budgets to pay for it, and then we'll go out and get it done.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to what may be the final frontier of my questions this morning, space. Who knew it was coming? Soon, very soon, I hope, this committee will begin a study on the future of role of space in Canada, whether that's protecting our sovereignty, whether it's upholding agreements with partners around the world, or whether it's making sure we have a robust and world-leading aerospace defense industry here in Canada. I noted that space is mentioned several times, many times in the defense policy update. I wonder if you could address the importance of the growing importance of space and the need for our own capabilities to keep up with that.
Situational awareness in the threat environment, I think it's important to recognize that there are many now theaters of conflict. Maritime for our Navy, in the air for our Air Force, and on land for our Army. But what we have found is that there are two new emerging threat environments. One is cyber, and the other is space. And we recognize that the safety and security in the space environment for satellite communications, for our GPS systems, for things that we as Canadians rely on and our allies rely on every day, making sure that we have an ability to protect that environment, to defend our interests, is something that we and our allies all recognize that we have to make significant new investments in. And as well, I think you'll also see, for example, an investment in new satellite, Arctic satellite systems in a ground station in the Arctic. That's an important recognition of the importance of the space environment, and a more than $2 billion investment in the cyber area. They're very related as well, because we have become, as a society and as a country, and increasingly reliant on the cyber world, and which much of which is tied to space capability. And so recognizing that defending our critical infrastructure and our national interest doesn't mean merely being able to respond on land, on air, and even in at sea, but also in space. And so we will be making future investments there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. That brings to an end the first hour with the minister. We appreciate your appearance here. The question by Madame Normandine, the battling mathematical nerds, left me a bit confused as to how the interaction between the commitment to cuts and the DPU investments is. Hopefully, Mr. Matthews will be able to expand on that. because I think it is of interest to the committee at large that we see how these two, on the face of it, irreconcilable notions are worked out. So with that, I just want to thank the minister for his appearance here, and we'll suspend for a minute or two while we re-empanel, and look forward to seeing you again. And I'll turn to either General Eyre or Mr. Matthews, Deputy Minister Matthews. I'm assuming, but correct me if I'm wrong, that there's no opening statement. So with that, we'll just move to questions. And looks like Mr. Bazan.
Cheryl first.
Oh, Ms. Gallant, first up. 6 minutes, please.
Canada was the fifth most targeted country for cyber attacks in the world last year. What makes Canada such a favorite target? Is it due to our vulnerability?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So as we have stated in our National Cyber Threat Assessment that was published in 2022, it is very frequent that Canada can be seen as a target because of the role that we play on the world stage. As well, we recognize that there are some state nations that are quite interested to, from a strategic perspective, to do harm to Canada in the cyberspace.
Okay, so there have been 3 cohorts of cyber operators graduate in the last few years, so you must have enough to stand up a military or stand up a command for cyber. And since 2016, we've told the CAF does have a cyber army and a cyber command. So why is there a discrepancy? And if there isn't one, why hasn't it been established yet?
Mr. Chair, I'll take that one. And so up until this point, many of the leaders and some of the functions have been double-hatted within the Canadian Armed Forces and indeed the department, because the cyber enterprise within the Canadian Armed Forces is actually under our CIO. What we're going to be doing is making the Canadian Armed Forces Cyber Command a stand-alone command. You know, think it's akin to our Special Operations Forces Command, our Intelligence Command, which shows just how important this capability is going forward. It's growing. We need to continue to grow, continue to develop our expertise, and in doing so, working very, very closely, hand in glove with our colleagues at CSE.
What plans are in place for a combined joint all-domain command and control?
So, Mr. Chair, I'll take this one as well. So, JADC2, Joint All-Domain Command and Control, or what we're calling in the Canadian Armed Forces Pan-Domain Command and Control, reflects the changing character of war, where the newer domains, space and cyber, need to be better integrated with the traditional domains of air, maritime, and land, and plus extending that to a whole-of-government approach. And so the seamless integration of the effects in those 5 domains require a new command and control system that can rapidly fuse intelligence, sensor data with shooters, effectors from various domains, and allows decision makers to make much more rapid decisions. So in the context of continental defense, for example, and the policy focuses a lot on that, rightly so from my perspective, as we take a look at the approaches to the continent, it gives us much better awareness what's coming, and then allows for decision space as to what to do about it.
That's great, CDS. However, there is nothing in the DPU about this. So if a plan's not written down, how do we know that Canada's actually working towards this goal?
So not, Mr. Chair, not everything in terms of military concepts that we're working on is in the DPU. However, I will say that the reference to digital transformation is absolutely there. And when I take a look at the various capabilities, the various modernization efforts that we need, digital modernization is right at the top of the list. And so we have other initiatives that are ongoing that are supported by the digital transformation hooks that are in the DPU.
AUKUS has signaled Japan will be invited to join on Pillar 2. What action is AUKUS waiting for to even consider Canada worthy of sharing advanced technology between the UK, US, and Australia?
Maybe I will take that one, Mr. Chair. Pillar 2, indeed, the U.S. announced last week that they're exploring things with Japan. We are actively engaged with AUKUS partners on items related to Pillar 2, AI, quantum, et cetera. And we continue to work with Pillar 2 partners or AUKUS Pillar 2 members to look at where Canada can add value. We're certainly at the table where we need to be. And
we're not part of it, and we haven't been asked to. So what is it that Canada is missing in order to be at that table?
So AUKUS partners have indicated that they are working on a framework for adding additional countries as partners on projects. That framework is not yet developed, but we are actively engaged in discussions.
When is the earliest possible date that the procurement process for the new submarines will begin, and the earliest date to announce the winner of the bid based on the planning group's work so far?
So, Mr. Chair, the policy mentions explore. So the options analysis has started. We have had a team meeting with various manufacturers of traditional conventional submarines. We will be looking at options to bring to the government for decision, and they will include conventional versus nuclear, but also how many submarines. So I cannot give you an answer on when at this stage.
So right now it's one in the water for Lucky for every 4 submarines. So I'll be asking about the numbers later. But locally, and General Eyre, you'd be familiar with Petawawa, there hasn't been additional housing for the barracks, new recruits. I understand it's on a cyclic basis, but that's where the majority of Ontario troops end up starting off. So, and we've got lots of capacity, new regiments standing up. When are we going to see some housing so that people can afford to be in the military?
So, Mr. Chair, I'll take this one first, maybe before turning over to the Deputy Minister. So I agree. Housing is a challenge right across the board, not just in Petawawa in Ontario. We have to take a look at our other bases as well. Trenton is another one. But we need to take a look at different ways of doing housing as well. And one of the options we're exploring is public-private partnerships. We've got the land. Interested land developers could perhaps help us develop as well. There's interest in certain areas, certain parts of the country. What I do know is we need to rapidly accelerate housing construction, because that is a shortfall, not just across the country, but for our members as well.
So where's the money for this, though? We all know that land can be repurposed, but there's no money.
Ms. Gallant, you've gone way past your time. I've been negligent in not introducing Pete Hammerschmidt, ADM Paul, who had a lot to do with the writing of the DPU, and apparently this is his first time before the committee. So I ask members to be gentle with him. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Fisher. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, General, to you and your team for being here today. You're here at committee a lot, and we certainly appreciate it. It's really important that the DPU reflect Canada's needs and Canada's priorities, but also that of our allies. As a member of the NATO PA, I get a chance to rub elbows with parliamentarians from dozens of countries, more recently, of course, with the new additions. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the air defense system in the update and how it's going to, invest in Canada's needs and Canada's priorities, but also our NATO allies as well?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the kind introduction. I can answer, and maybe the Chief will want to jump in afterwards. As part of the process for the consultations for the development of this policy, of course, as you can well imagine, we did consult allies extensively, among other stakeholders. And allies really imparted to us the importance of Canada continuing to play a really important role in the Euro-Atlantic space, as we're doing, for example, in Latvia, but also in our own space, in the Arctic, in the continent, because they're making the link between Canada, North America as a continent, being NATO's western flank and also NATO's northern flank, and the link between our defense of that space to the defense of the Euro-Atlantic space and NATO's overall deterrence and defense agenda. And so that really helped inform the focus in the policy on the Arctic and on defending the continent. But it also helped inform, those consultations helped inform the proposed investments, the commitment to pursue a number of investments and to explore others that will ensure that the CAF, have the capabilities they need to be able to play the role that they're expected to play in the Allied context, including in the Euro-Atlantic space.
And if I can make 2 points on this. Firstly, we're very happy to see the policy with the regional focus on the Arctic, as are our allies. This has been a regional vulnerability, especially for our U.S. allies. And speaking to the chair of the Military Committee of NATO last week, very happy as well that that's our regional focus. Given what we're facing as a globally integrated threat environment, if we have wider war in Europe with NATO, if there is war in Asia, it's going to be across the globe. And the Arctic is now an area of competition, potentially conflict. And so the regional focus, that part is well received. The second piece, in the document, there is a discussion about the integrated air and missile defense, which is absolutely the way to go forward. The clearest, starkest example of this is what happened 48 hours ago in Israel, with multiple types of weapons being shot against the country, drones, several types of drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and the integrated nature of the response. Aircraft, ground-based air defense, various types, ship-based air defense, and the command and control system that brings it together. And so we've got some investments here, and also through NORAD modernization in the sensors that are required. Ms. Gallant talked about the pan-domain command and control that's going to be required to bring it all together. And so this concept, as we go forward for continental defense, is increasingly important, not just here in North America, but also with respect to our commitments in NATO and also in the Indo-Pacific.
I'm not sure how much time I have left, but there's 2 topics I want to kind of touch on. One is the minister talked about the MOU with the Czech government to provide Ukraine with ammunition. Also in the NATO PA, we have the conversation on a regular basis about just how hard it is to ramp up domestic production in all of the NATO countries. Can you tell me just a little bit about that? And maybe if there's any time left to touch on the joint CAF CSE cyber operations group that I believe would probably go to Ms. Xavier.
So maybe I'll start with ammunition, and then I can turn to the chief and the other chief on cyber. The funds for Ukraine and ammunition, Czechs have done a great job around setting up a pool to acquire ammunition, so that that those funds have been transferred and those acquisitions are ongoing. On the ramp up of domestic production around ammunition, these are long timelines. What we actually want is a new production line started, and so that will take time. In the interim, the production of the current round domestically has increased over the past year, but our eventual goal here is a new production line, and so those discussions will recommence shortly now that we have a policy decision. Cyber?
Yes, so thanks for the question. Just building on what I said earlier, this investment that's being made in the DPU is really an opportunity for us to continue the work that we've already begun working on since Budget 2022 investments, where we've been jointly working with the CAF on the Foreign Cyber Operations Program. So this will be the opportunity to continue to stand that up in the way in which the CDS explained a few minutes ago, where we can continue to jointly and uniquely use our respective skills to be able to use the Foreign Cyber Operations Program to be able to do our part in protecting Canadians and Canada.
30 seconds left. I think I'll happily pass that along to the next speaker.
I'm sure Ms. Masson will appreciate that. Yeah. Ms. Normandine, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. General Eyre, a question for you. Let me get back to my last question to the Minister. You know that missions are really what attract people to the Canadian Armed Forces. The Minister referred to what's happening in Latvia, but he didn't refer to the Rapid Intervention Force. He did refer to the fact that there were some issues with personnel and with equipment. So my question, I'll reiterate, is it reasonable to think that a peacekeeping rapid response team can be implemented in this year, as the government has said?
Monsieur le Président, merci beaucoup pour
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. Actually, we do have a rapid response team currently. For instance, last fall, after the attack on Israel, we deployed a rapid intervention force in the Middle East for the evacuation of non-combatants if there was a need for any need. And now currently we have a team to support the embassy. It was elsewhere also, and this was rapidly deployed in Haiti. And that is clearly a sign that we can deploy when needed. Thank you. The operation in Cyprus and Haiti is a limited number that what was promised by Canada's 200 forces and logistics behind them. Is it realistic to imagine that that could be in place by 2026? Actually, in October, November, we deployed 500 additional CAF members in the Middle East for a state of readiness in case of an evacuation. If I may, Mr. Chair, I'll add something, and my counterpart, Mr. Hammersmith, would have something to add as well. The promise to establish something by 2026-27.
Response force for peacekeeping. We will continue to work with the United Nations to look for possible opportunities there, but I also wanted to stress that in the interim, the UN has stressed to Canada specialized training, capacity building, and tactical airlift is where they are seeing the greatest value from Canada. So I did want to mention that this is a dialogue with the United Nations. Pete, quelque chose à ajouter ou non?
Pas beaucoup.
Not much to add. Exactly that.
Is looking for from countries like Canada are things like specialized training, are things like capacity building that we can offer to other countries to help them deploy to peacekeeping operations.
Alors, je comprends malgré tout que la promesse. I gather that that hasn't been delivered, then, that promise. But I'd like to get back to the chair's comments on my math earlier on. The minister mentioned earlier that in my question I wasn't taking into consideration the modernization of NORAD, but modernization the announcement was in 2023 prior to the cutbacks. In August, when Minister Annan announced that there would be cutbacks and that the decision was $900 million per year in defense, I would imagine you were already working on the updating of the defense policy update, that is. Before announcing that $900 million in cuts, did you already know that it would be coming out of one pocket and going into the other through the defense policy update for the next 2 years? Thank you for the question. The decision with respect to the defense policy update is brand new. At the time of the announcement made by the government to reduce expenditures, that at that point we don't know how much will be included in the update.
Suggest, Mr. Chair, for members as you watch this space going forward around defense spending, the reductions or reallocation exercise the government has launched for all departments, including defense, very much targeted on operational funding. You are seeing new investment in the defense policy that's now been articulated, and it's a mix of capital and frankly heavily weighted towards capital. I would distinguish as you watch this space between Vote 5, which is our capital spending, Vote 1, which is our operating spending. Obviously, they have to go hand in hand to make sure you support and the various activities. And so I would watch the interplay between those two things as time goes on. But what still holds, sorry, Mr. Chair, the 1.76 by 2930 in terms of percentage of GDP, that number factors in everything we know.
Merci beaucoup, mais ma question porte.
Thank you, but my question was specific to the next 2 years. Again, for some specifics, let me get back to the quote from the CDA Institute referring to Vote 1 and 5. Do we not get the feeling for the next 2 years that you're taking money out of, let's say, operational maintenance? And so I think you understand what I'm saying. I'm skipping over my words. And the acquisition of material for major capacity, isn't that just essentially a transfer? I would say that it's actually an exercise in ensuring that the money spent by the department
areas possible in terms of maximizing readiness. So when we look at the exercise to reallocate well onboarding new projects, we want to, protect readiness at all costs. So there are certainly things that get spent in operational dollars that's critical money to maintain the fleets, et cetera. We want to protect readiness as we work through the exercise to reduce or reallocate funding as the government has directed.
6 minutes. Madam Madsen.
Thank you. It was briefly touched upon with the minister. Well, actually, not so briefly. It was greatly touched upon in terms of the Arctic infrastructure for dual-use projects. One of the major operations, or Operation Nanook, has regularly used Cambridge Bay as a regional hub in Nunavut. The minister spoke about the paving of those runways and the expansion of those. When will the government commit to investing in that specific upgrade of the airway, as it's much needed for dual use, to ensure that skyrocketing cost of food in Nunavut helps in terms of landing larger planes?
So, Mr. Chair, I've been stuck in Cambridge Bay as a snowstorm came in and that runway closed down and I was stuck in a tent. That's another war story. But what we're about to embark on as a result of this policy update is a northern basing strategy. As we take a look at these northern operational support hubs, where do we need to strategically place those so that we can maintain a persistent presence, not a permanent presence, but a persistent presence in the north based on what the threat is, what the activity that's ongoing. And so these northern operational support hubs will consist of improved runways, infrastructure, roads, telecommunications, developed in partnership with local communities, so it becomes a win-win. Also in partnership with NORAD. And indeed, we're hosting Commander NORAD here over the next couple of days to discuss the integration of continental defense, the NORAD enterprise, and what we're doing. That work is going to continue over the next little while to determine where those northern operational support hubs are required.
One of the pieces that's quite large, and again, Minister referred to, and the update refers to the importance of Rangers. One of the things that Rangers have been asking for quite some time is an increase to the equipment usage rate especially that it be indexed immediately to inflation. I mean, these folks, they're paying out of pocket for equipment, snowmobiles, for example. They don't receive that reimbursement for into a year after they've purchased it. When can they expect that increase?
Maybe I will start and see if the Chief or Pete want to add. What we have done, Mr. Chair, is adjust process to make sure the reimbursements to rangers are happening more quickly, because we do acknowledge that time delay, that the processing time it was taking was not helpful. So that there's been changes made to accelerate that process. In terms of actual changes to the rates of reimbursement, I'm not sure if one of my colleagues has an answer or not.
Mr. Chair, I just checked my notes, and I've got an answer for you. There's a new non-taxable compensation and benefits instruction to compensate the Canadian Rangers for usage of personally owned equipment. That was put in place on August 1st of last year. And this provides for the compensation to Rangers for the use of a normal wear and tear of their personally owned equipment, think ATVs, snowmobiles, etc., when participating on military operations, training, or exercises. And we're also in the process of streamlining the claims procedure for losses and damages to that same equipment, including a delegation of authority to more rapidly approve those claims. So the aim is to expedite what they're asking for.
Okay. We've recently completed a study on the rise of operational deployments. We heard the majority of CAF deployments are now, of course, being used to fight climate change and climate catastrophes. There wasn't a lot in the defense update that touched on those domestic deployments. There wasn't mention of new initiatives or new training programs or so on, new equipment to combat wildfires in particular. Can you explain what's being done to fill that gap on the domestic deployments piece?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. No, there are no specific initiatives to deal just purely with that role of the Canadian Armed Forces, but as you will have seen in the update, there's a series of initiatives to ensure improvements and increases in the overall readiness of the Canadian Armed Forces. So, obviously for deployments, it takes training, it takes people, it takes infrastructure, it takes equipment, and there's major investments that are laid out in the policy to make those investments in maintenance and sustainment of equipment, to increase the size of the forces, to invest in infrastructure across the country to allow the military to be more capable of responding, and a general increase in the overall responsiveness of the military, including through new capabilities like the tactical helicopter replacement. So there are a range of initiatives that will address readiness writ large, which will have the consequence of improving the readiness of the CAF to be able to respond to fires and natural disasters.
40 seconds? 20. I can bank it again, maybe. Okay. Thank you.
You got a savings account going.
No one seems to acknowledge it.
Yes. Mr. Kelly, 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. On this question will probably be from Mr. Matthews, although I would, if there are other witnesses that want to chime in, that's fine. But on Part 3 of the policy, in bold at the top on page 17, it says, "We will establish a Canadian Armed Forces housing strategy, rehabilitate existing housing, and build new housing." Now, setting aside whether or not establishing this strategy is a new policy, which, if that's a new policy, it suggests there was no strategy before, which would be troubling. But if you go to the index, there's actually virtually no money in this new policy. $0 this year, $0 next year for housing for Canadian Armed Forces personnel. The maintaining and renewing national defense infrastructure is $0 this year, $103 million next year. So how is this an actual policy update when it contains no measurable outcomes, no money or nominal money, It's just a statement that says there'll be a housing strategy. Could you explain how policy is going to get our troops lodged? We have personnel in tents. We have a 6,000 unit backlog. We have people leaving the forces because of housing. We have a recruitment and a retention crisis. We're 16,000 personnel short. And I don't see anything in this policy statement that's going to solve any of that.
Mr. Chair, I will start with the housing, but the wrap up to that question actually touched on some other elements, including recruiting and retention, that I will leave some time for my colleague, the Chief, to maybe touch on. So on the housing front, as the Minister had indicated, there's a broader set of initiatives happening on housing because there are two solution sets here. One is housing provided by the military for its members. The second is to live on the economy, as they say, or house yourself on market economy. There's been a series of compensation measures to reimburse those depending on the market they are in for those who choose to live off base. We're also investing already in rehabilitating existing housing, which in some cases needs a refresh, but also build new. So the plan is for 650 units over the next 5 years. The strategy, I think, is the important piece, and General Eyre touched on this, is looking at new ways to possibly partner with others to build housing more rapidly, and that's the part that is to come. But there is still continued investment planning.
So it's not an actual policy, it's an aspiration to someday have a policy. But if I may actually stop you on that number for new housing, 600 units over 5 years, that's not going to fix the backlog. And the existing budget, we had a study on this, the budget for prolonging the life of existing housing, we had testimony on this, would seem to be inadequate. And barracks housing, which Mrs. Gallant talked about, which isn't part of, that's a separate issue from the rest of the housing that we've talked about, but we've heard deplorable conditions in some barracks, as well as other workspaces and buildings that are, and I see the Chief Defense Staff is nodding on this point. Where is the actual plan and policy to fix these problems that are driving people out of the forces? General, do you want to?
So, Mr. Chair, let me go back to the strategy for a second, and why this is so important. So we need this in place so that we've got a view on housing that will take us into the future as we bring in the units and the capabilities that we see articulated in this policy. If we go back in time to the end of the Cold War, where we demolished or sold off thousands of housing units. Arguably, that was the peace dividend being cashed in, which we have done numerous times over the course of the last 30 years. We've got to be thinking ahead as to what units we need, what capabilities we need, where new people are going to be going. On-base and off-base housing, what incentives, benefits are required for off-base housing as well to assist members who want to live in on the economy. So it's got to be a holistic strategy from that perspective. That is the long term. Short term, I agree with you. We have a short-term housing challenge right now. We need to repair and upgrade single and residential housing units as quickly as possible.
And yet it's $0 in the next 2 years in this update
Kelly.
on that.
Thank you for editorial comments. Madame Lalonde, 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
I want to say and acknowledge always our men and women in uniform who are serving and thanking them. And I had the great pleasure this weekend of attending my first ball. And it was an event to remember. So I want to also commend the entire organization who created this wonderful environment where we recognize for individuals for their service. So I want to start by saying this and thank you for all of you for being here today. We know that defense spending fell below 1% in 2014, and I think the minister made that reference. And in 2017, we brought forward a policy, strong, secure, engage. We call it SSC, that's the most common use of it. And now as we are here today, we're talking about the update of the policy. And, as we're calling our North Strong and Free as an update. There was reference made along the way about some of the languages of exploration, looking into. And sometimes I feel like, and I don't want to undermine the work, but sometimes we aspire as almost a shopping list, like we want things. But we absolutely need to make sure that the readiness and the preparedness of our force. And I had the pleasure of touring a few military bases in my role as parliamentary secretary. And I certainly appreciate the effort that is made under this current policy, because I think it does reflect more than the aspiration where the opposition is trying to gear this conversation, but more concrete action that we're going to be seeing the benefits. I do want to talk, though, and hear from you about what are the commitments that was made under our existing policy, the 2017 SSC, as we continue to deliver the equipment and the tools that our CAF member needs for now. And as we begin at the same time to transition into the real work of the new technology that may be needed. So I would certainly appreciate to hear from all of you today.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I will start. Number one, the projects that were already launched under SSE, they still hold. So that work is continuing. On the capital side, just over 50% of those projects are either closed out or in closeout. And we've got, we can provide a list of project updates if that's helpful. What I would say from a dollars perspective, though, many of the capital projects that are the most expensive ones, and think about shipbuilding, think about F-35, they come towards the end of the 20-year policy. So those projects continue. What we've got in the defense policy update is some additional projects that have been added on and funded, and some others where the exploration is the word that has been used. Submarines is a favorite example, but also ground-based air defense, where we need, the range of possibilities is quite large. So there's some work to do to articulate what is needed, develop some options, and so that work will now start in earnest as well. Pete or Chief?
I'll jump in. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. I think we did a really hard look at the SSC experience and the implementation experience as we did the policy development work for the policy update. There was a lot in SSC that was right, and then there's a lot in SSC that we thought we could do better at. And so when you look at the new policy, there are some specific investments in things like infrastructure and sustainment and people that we knew we needed to get right to be able to be in a position to implement the projects that are identified in the new policy quicker and more efficiently. So in total, there's about 24 projects in the new policy that have been funded, that the government is moving out on, that the government is committed to do immediately. And then, as referenced, there's other projects, about 11, that the government has committed to pursue in terms of establishing the capability, but the government is committed to explore options as to how best to actually pursue that. And so we'll be working on those in tandem with the implementation of the existing initiatives to bring proposals forward to government as soon as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Lalonde. Madame Normandine, 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'd like a bit more detail on the production of munitions, the 155 millimeters specifically. There was an announcement made, 4.8 million to go from 3 to 5 million, the amount of munitions that are produced. But we know that Ukraine uses far more than we're producing. So I'd like to know to what extent we'll be able to increase production. If we want to the M107s, which we produce, to M185s, which seem to be really what we need in the field, that would take $400 million before even counting shells that would be produced. So these amounts that are announced for this current fiscal and next fiscal, those agreements signed with these companies, what is it going to take for us to really meet the needs and the expectations of Ukraine in the areas of artillery? Thank you for the question. I'll start, and I would imagine General Eyre will have comments as well with respect to the different sorts of ammunition.
Only so much you can do to increase, production on an existing line, and that production has increased from 3,000 to 5,000 per month. But what we really want here is a new production line in Canada to produce, ideally, a different type of round that's actually better quality, and the Chief can talk about that. So that the real goal here is to have a new production line in Canada, not just for Ukraine, but also to replenish our own stocks so we can, develop our own inventories in case they are needed. And that will benefit all allies, and all allies are doing the same thing. So, General Eyre, I don't know if you want to add comments on the different types of rounds.
Monsieur le Président, je n'ai pas beaucoup.
Mr. Chair, I don't have much to add. We need the 155 millimeters.
It is more accurate and has a larger kill radius than the M107 round. That's why we urgently need to get this into production.
Donc, je comprends que ça prendrait 400 millions.
Quickly, I understand it would require, we need $400 million to produce these new munitions. I only see 15 and 137 million over the next couple of years. To achieve that end, we need to work with private enterprises, and it'll take some time to build these new facilities. So we can start spending in the coming years, but most of the investment
Start actually once the building of the new line starts, and that involves a lot of design and engineering work, so that work will start.
2.5 minutes, Ms. Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The defense policy update signals some changes, but I didn't see any commitments to reforming on outsourcing and the contracting practices. Recently, we had testimony from UNDE and PIPSI leadership here. They're very frustrated, as are we, about this idea of value for money analysis, which they can't get any answers out of. And in fact, when Mr. Matthews, when you were here before the committee, you had talked about that analysis, and yet nobody seems to be able to get that analysis out or to see through it. Those auditing practices aren't as transparent or transparent at all. So, can you provide a bit more commentary on? I'm sure you saw the testimony from the union leadership on all of that. Can you provide some comments on that for us here today?
Certainly, and it comes up in a number of areas. Yes, from our union colleagues, but also when we talk to military members who are on base managing budgets, we often hear about, I've got money in this pocket, for contractors, but I'd rather have employees, or in some cases vice versa, because I can't find employees, but I can get contractors. So we are reinforcing with those who manage budgets on bases that there are ways to move money into the most efficient place. Where we have made commitments around value for money is any time a new idea for, I'll say, outsourcing or taking public service work and using contractors is being put on the table, we demand a business case. There are no active discussions around any of that right now, so I have no business cases to share, but that is a requirement we have shared with our management team. Equally, where there is more efficient ways to do business by turning, moving away from contractors and using public servants, we are also encouraging people to look at that. We've had some interesting experience with one of those, as you would be aware, recently, but there are active discussions where the labor force exists, where we can turn contractors into public servants, and we know it's long-term work, it's actually typically more efficient for us to use public servants in that scenario. We have other scenarios where the skill set doesn't exist in the public service, so contractors will continue to play a role. But there's nothing explicit here. I will say the reductions or reallocation exercise that we were talking about a few moments ago, that is actually driving a lot of conversations around what is the right model to deliver a service. And if it's cheaper to use public servants or more efficient to use public servants, we are certainly welcome to those discussions. In some cases, the labor force does not exist.
Thank you, Ms. Madison. Mr. Bazan, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to follow up on Mr. Matthews' question, your comments right now, Mr. Matthews. You want to turn more contractors into employees of the Department of National Defence. We just went through Dalian Enterprises and Mr. Yo, and that he received over $8 million in contracts through the Arrive scam situation that we're dealing with. That's quite the scandal, and then he became an employee of the department. You have suspended him. You have turned this over to the military police, my understanding, and being investigated. What's the status of that investigation?
So we have made the military police aware of the situation. Mr. Yo's employment has been terminated. He resigned, in fact, before we could move to termination. And so we are continuing to investigate any potential work he was doing. To date, we have confirmed that, of the contracts he was working on before he became an employee, services were delivered in a satisfactory manner. We are still looking to make sure there are no instances where he was doing contract work while he was an employee, and we have yet to find any, but that work is ongoing.
But at the same time, we know through the Arrive scam scandal that they were they were getting contracts without providing any work and were subcontracting it. So as part of your investigation, cooperating with the RCMP on the broader investigation going into the Arrive scandal?
The department will cooperate with any police investigation as it relates to Mr. Yo's work as a consultant with National Defence, and then he did the same work as an employee. So this was an example of someone who was doing full-time contract work, and somebody realized, in theory, it would be better to make him an employee, more efficient. That work was delivered as advertised, and so no issues there, but obviously we will cooperate with any police investigation.
I want to move on to my next round of questions. First of all, I want to thank General Eyre. I don't know if we'll have you back again before the end of session and before you retire as Chief of Defence Staff. And I want to thank you for your incredible service and leadership that you've provided during a difficult time in the Canadian Armed Forces. We scanned through the defense policy update, and no place do we talk about war footing. We know that from the department's reports that only 58% of the Canadian Armed Forces are standing ready and can be deployed. The Air Force is in even worse shape with 55% of its equipment is unserviceable or unavailable. The Royal Canadian Navy, 54% of the ships and crews there are undeployable. And we, of course, Admiral Topshee's video spoke to that. The Army is 46% of the equipment is unserviceable. We talked about 16,000 troops short. 10,000 troops are under-trained and undeployable. Where are we at right now with the number of troops that we have, total members of the Canadian Armed Forces? And my understanding is 15,000 people applied to be members of the Canadian Armed Forces and were turned away or walked away because of the timelines taken to recruit.
Well, Mr. Chair, there's a lot in there. So firstly, on the policy document itself, and you talked about war footing, and so the characterization of the security environment and how as it applies to Canada with the geopolitical, with the technological change, with climate change that's in there. Happy with that. Likewise, with the strategic framework of the focus on foundational readiness and deterrence, absolutely necessary. And I think something that all Canadians need to realize is the relationship of our vital national interest of prosperity to deterrence, deterring aggression, deterring instability in the international order. As a trading nation, absolutely required. You think we got financial problems now? If we can't collectively deter, further imperialism and the like, it's going to be much, much more difficult. In terms of readiness, again, happy to see that we were listened to in terms of building up foundational readiness. Before we get new capabilities, we need to build readiness in what we have. If we look at the pillars of readiness, personnel, which I'll get to in a second, equipment and the serviceability rate for which we're getting the national procurement funds. Not everything we asked for, but
interesting here because I think that we got a lot here to discuss in the defense policy update. So I want to move the following motion so we can dig into this in greater detail. That given the state of the Canadian Armed Forces, which is experiencing record low recruitment and retention and sees active service members using food banks and are unhoused, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study on the timeline and implementation of the defense policy update. That the committee shall hold a minimum of 7 meetings for the duration of the study, and that the committee invite the Minister of Public Service and Procurement along with relevant defense industry, academics, and other stakeholders, and that the committee report its findings to the House. And that was originally circulated, although I made some minor amendments since we've already had the Minister of Defense here today as well, along with department officials. Can I speak to that, Mr. Chair?
You may. It's been tabled, and it's in order, and it's relevant.
So I don't think that this is too complicated. I would just say, colleagues, that we've got a lot here to unpack in DPU, and General Eyre has started to lay out all the things that need to happen in addressing the challenges that we have and the threat environment we're facing. And I think for us to thoroughly know what's facing Canada as a nation from a threat environment standpoint and how we're going to address it with the current recruitment retention crises that we have, as we look at housing continue to be a challenge, the cost of living crisis that's been created by the Liberal government because of the carbon tax and inflationary costs going up, that we've got troops using food banks or relying on food donations when they're in Ottawa on training. We should really take a fulsome approach to the DPU to ensure that it is addressing the threat environment we're facing, the needs of the Canadian Armed Forces, and that we're buying the right kit for those that are going to be needed to do the tasks at hand. We haven't even touched on the DPU on the research side. Like where are we going to go with artificial intelligence? How are we going to use more robotics? What about more drone capabilities, both on the air, on the ground, and in and on the sea? So we have to really take a fulsome approach to this, and I think that 7 meetings are required.
Just as a point of clarification, your motion says 8 meetings.
I did some amendments on the move here because we've already had the Minister of National Defense. That takes away 1 meeting, okay. So I'm saying 7 meetings, and I've added in after using food banks and unhoused members. So,
okay. Thank you, Ms. Lalonde.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think the intent of the motion is something that we would feel comfortable with. There's a few things, and the first proposed friendly, it's not a friendly, a proposed amendment to this would be that instead of acknowledging, and I think I'm trying to see here where it says 8 meeting, we would like to strike this and say at least, the committee shall hold at least 3 meetings for the duration of the study, just not to, we do have space study and other things that we've been trying to resolve as part of this wonderful committee. I am very fond of this DPU. Actually, I think it's a great story to share. We know the importance of it. At the same time, as we heard today, there is a new reality, which is cyber space and the value of looking at this. This was something unique. So I am proposing, Mr. Chair, that we look at that the committee shall hold at least 3 meetings for the duration of the study.
Amendment is from 7 to 3. Okay. At least 3. At least 3.
Minimum 3, at least 3. Same thing.
Yeah. Any other debate?
I'll just say that I think it needs to be more than that, 4 or 5 as a minimum, but let the committee determine that number of meetings.
I feel like we're bargaining, like a bingo game. Ms. Mattson?
My concern, too, I would support 3, but I would want to know that this would happen after, because we do legitimately have 3 other studies that we are juggling at the same time that have been planned out, and I would just want to know and maybe we should, again, I would push for a subcommittee meeting where we could discuss and plan out our calendar for business.
Ms. Mass, or Norman Dean?
Merci pour faire suite à l'intervention.
Thank you. To follow up on Ms. Madison's comments, I tabled a motion that is actually calling for the committee to meet in the subcommittee meeting, and but the committee entrusts the subcommittee with the task of proposing at its convenience an order of business for the committee. In that sense, I'm fine with the amendment. I'm fine with the motion as it is. If my motion is agreed to, then we could discuss these measures in subcommittee.
I didn't want to impact on today, but the clerk and I were going to respond to your motion on Wednesday. That was the idea. And I agree with the general point that you got 4 or 5 studies that potentially could be done. We have limited amount of time. We do have an agenda, but it looks like the committee is changing its agenda. Yeah, so it's a bit of a challenge to try and get going on things. So I see Mr. Kelly and then Mr. Bazan.
No, I didn't have my hand up to speak. I'm content to let this go to a vote.
You're just waving your hand, were you? Okay.
No, I wasn't.
Then Mr. Bazan, and
So I'll just say this, that first of all, this is probably a major policy shift that we haven't that we need to look into. This is what's going to be the guiding light for the Canadian Armed Forces for the next year or two at minimum. So we need to take a hard look at this. When last motions and committee structure was set up in the past, we didn't know the DPO was coming out last week. So I think that the situation has changed, and it is. I think it'd be irresponsible of us not to do this study. And I would just say to Ms. Normandine's motion is that we should have that discussion and organize the committee's work, and that's what we do at subcommittee when the chair calls it.
okay, I'm running. The clock is running here, and Ms. Gallant.
Given all the studies we have ongoing, I would ask that if you can't get witnesses in on a certain day, as a week ago from today, at least get the living motion of the threat analysis with some people from Global Affairs to keep us up to date on what's going on, and we might as well call the question.
Gallant, or sorry, you're not Gallant. Lalonde, and then Mr. Fisher.
Thank you. I don't come from military family, but I'm just going to say this today because I am fascinated to see when it comes to a planning, and I think that's what military is all about, is having clear direction, a plan, and an agenda. And this committee, since I've been part of, have been derailed time and time again when we have valuable witnesses for the benefits of one party. And I do believe, and I will support Mrs. Normandin's motion, we absolutely need a subcommittee. We've been calling on this, and there was one particular member of this committee that has refused to come to the table. So I'm glad to hear that he's changing his mind, and we're finally going to get some real work done in this committee instead of having clips for one party in particular. Donc sur ça, c'est sûr que pour moi.
So on that note, clearly this motion is important. Mr. Mazan's motion, we agree on the principle, which is to continue the study on the policy. But I want a plan, because without a plan, this is what happens. We do nothing, Mr. Bazan. So, Mr. Chair, I certainly hope that today we'll be able to have a subcommittee meeting as soon as possible so we can establish a dedicated plan, a timeline for our studies. That the space was very important. We'd started that. And that we start minimum of 3 on this, and then we'll see how many meetings. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The last speaker on this.
So,
Mr. Fisher.
well, I was just going to suggest that if it's possible to amend taking out the committee report, its findings to the House, and supplement that with pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests a comprehensive government response.
Amendment on the table. That's the second amendment.
Thought maybe I'd add to Marie France's amendment.
We're not going to get to a vote on this.
Okay.
Well, because we've run out of time, that's why.
No, we can still, you can vote
Do we
right now.
still have time?
Because of the suspension, yeah.
Okay. So we've got 5 more minutes. Okay, so at this point, we've dealt with any other speakers on this?
Voting on.
Well, that's it. That's it.
Voting on the 3 dates, minimum 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Lalonde amendment.
So better known as the Lalonde Amendment. So we're good for on 3. So the amendment is 3 on Mr. Bazan's main motion. Those in favor? Those opposed? Okay. That amends the motion. So now the motion as amended. Those in favor?
Something else.
He called the question. But he called the question.
He knows I have an amendment.
He didn't, because you called the question.
Yeah. If I'd known it, I would have. No, I did call the question, and I did not know about any other amendment. So the motion as amended, I'd called. So those in favor? Those opposed?
Mr. Chair.
I was asking, we've amended the motion. I called for the vote on the motion as amended. So, okay, there we are. No, we've already done. We're done. So, in terms of trying to get some coherence here, we had Wednesday set up. Do you want me to then cancel the witnesses or postpone the witnesses? So do you want, so how am I going to get any organization in all of these motions if I don't set aside time to meet with the committee? Mr. Kelly.
I would suggest you could set it up now for a meeting that has not otherwise been already devoted to witnesses. So make it next Monday.
No, that's not, next Monday we're not here.
Sorry,
we're not here
sir,
the Monday after that.
No, the Monday that we
And we
follow.
already have space and set up for the first Monday we're back.
Postpone Wednesday's witnesses.
Well, we've got witnesses that have traveled for that. I think that you can't. I mean, this is Lindsay's study. We've got. There are witnesses that have gone to some extent to be here. You could add an hour now. You've got you're on Monday. Add an hour to Wednesday.
I mean, all this stuff
Are we?
is done just by the Conservatives making all these.
Are we good with adding an hour? Can we do that?
Well, I can ask. Yeah.
We can ask.
This was my suggestion.
We can ask. Okay. No, Wednesday. Okay. Do we have some